Call the meeting to order. The UHS 6 board meeting that was originally scheduled for Monday, rescheduled for today, February 5th. And we have we'll start the meeting off with a public information meeting on the proposed fiscal 2016 budget. This budget has been approved by the board at our last meeting and is ready to go to the annual meeting next week. This is the opportunity for the public to weigh in with comments and questions on the budget. We've been through it now twice with the board. Last time was in its final form. The books are published, they're available at the central office, probably at every school, town offices. So those of you who are watching us on TV, if you want to get a copy of it ahead of the meeting, they are available. And does everybody on the board have a copy? There's two books. There's the big book, so to speak, that has everything in it, including the accountant's information. And pass this down. There's Melanie. And then the summary book here. So what I would like to do to start off with is I would just go very briefly through the key points in the book. I won't take it to the level that I probably overdid at the first meeting with the board. But I'd like to just preface my remarks by saying how pleased the board is with this budget and how proud we are of the work and the approach that the administrators took to preparing this budget. As anybody who's been paying any attention to what's going on in the state of Vermont in particular knows, it's incredible amount of pressure on school budgets and talk about declining enrollments and higher per student cost. And our people are sensitive to that, and the board is sensitive to that. And we have put a great deal of effort into making this budget a level budget without sacrificing the programs that we know we need to provide the education that's expected. I think that this group in particular, and I'm looking at the administrators, do not have a silo mentality. They work together, and there's numerous situations where the Career Center in the high school or the high school and BAMS have worked together to be able to redeploy resources, both human resources and physical resources, to get the job done with a little bit less expense. And I think it's a great job. So just briefly, and I refer everyone to page 37 in the, I'm using the big book, so if you're in the small book, it's probably a different page, but it's the summary. And I just wanted to touch on the 5 major categories that make up our budget, and some of the key things that happened as we put this budget together. The first, and you can see this goes back to the 2013-14 budget, last year's actual, this year's budget, and the proposed for next year, and the variation. And our budget is broken up into 5 main categories, and the first one at the top is district-wide, which is, as you know, the services that go across all 3 units, health, security, the library, big one is operations and maintenance, the facility, and this is a budget that is a good chunk of the total at about $11 million. You'll note that on page 37, it does show that the district-wide budget is up about $119,000. However, Within that is a $116,000 journal entry for the state pass-through program, Vermont High School Completion. And you'll notice on page 39 in the revenue section, I'm jumping around a little bit, just wanted to show you, it shows up there as revenue. So it's a requirement that we do that, show it that way. But that's a pretty big chunk of that difference there. The other thing that I'd like to point out regarding the district-wide, everything was held pretty much level. And you'll note that operations and maintenance on page 44 is actually down a fair amount. And I want to assure everyone that that does not reflect deferring maintenance. We've been very careful since we've had this new facility to maintain it as we need to and not defer it. And in a tight budget year, it could be easy to say, well, let's just not do this or let's not do that. Deferred maintenance is down, but it's that we don't need to do quite as much this particular year. There weren't as many items that showed up in that. So we have a plan, a long-term maintenance plan and a capital plan, and we are sticking with that, but we were able to plug a smaller number in for operations and maintenance. So if you set aside that journal entry, it's pretty close to a level budget in the district. Then senior high is actually down 2.5%. And again, to my knowledge, we have not dropped any programs. We may have, through attrition, we may have made some slight changes in staffing. One social studies position that was not filled. And then there are some other, there have been some retirements over the last 2 or 3 years that have helped us to save there. And in the high school, all the expenses that can be controlled are extremely well controlled, and they've been able to get the 2 academies going, the STEM Academy and the Arts Academy, without really having a budget impact. So that's an example of being able to develop a new program without having a major budget impact. And I'm particularly impressed with that. That's a great job there. So the senior high is down 162,000. Tied in with that is the next line, which is the tuition to the Career Center, and that's based on the number of BUHS students that go to the Career Center. So that's a number that is up 157,000 or 8.2%. However, that's just a factor of how many kids are projected to be doing tuition at the Career Center. Moving on down to BAMS. BAMS is a budget that's up a little bit. However, BAMS is a place where we're bucking probably the statewide trend of reduced census and increasing. The BAMS enrollment this year is just 300, 1 or 2, something like that, and the projection for next year is 323. And as little as a couple of years ago, our projection was 277. So it's a significant number of students, and we've been able to accommodate those students, provide great programming for them, and have a minimal increase. Discretionary funds were held pretty level at BAMS. So on a per student basis, we actually are keeping things held level, how much it's costing us. But the bottom line is up 138,000 or 4%. Last of the main categories is the Career Center, and the Career Center is down. We've reduced administrative costs there, and there's another place where we've reallocated resources, particularly from the Career and College Readiness Program. So we're getting the same programs accomplished with less expense. And we've started up the biomedical science program there at the same time. So if you add all those 5 columns together, you come up with a local operating budget, which is actually essentially flat, 0.1% increase. And I think under the circumstances, that's a great job by administration and the staff and teachers figuring out how to do that. You'll note below that line that there is, the last 2 years, we have requested the special article to put $150,000 in a capital, long-term capital plan budget, and we elected not to do that this year. And when Frank reviews the revenue and the tax impact, you'll probably see why. Our debt service drops a little bit, the main project debt service and the track debt service. So the bottom line is a 0.58% decrease in expenses and a budget of $27,888,081. And again, there was a lot of work that went into it. There were revisions upon revisions right up to the final vote, and we appreciate the work that went into it by the staff. You want to quickly take us through the revenue?
Sure.
Part of it and the tax implications?
Okay. So the revenue detail starts on page 38 and it goes through page 39 and 40. In the first group of funds for revenues, the major change there you can see is the $800,000 that we don't have available for the bond refund. That was a one-time event. That's a significant loss of revenue, and that that had to be made up primarily in the education state support grant. But because we did reduce spending, as Woody has outlined, we didn't have to make all of that up in the state education spending grant. So as you go on to the next group of accounts, the subgrants, it's not substantially different than the fiscal year 15. The total there you see fiscal year 15, 274 versus the 247 projected for fiscal year 16. So there are some pluses and minuses, but not substantially different. In the state fund area, this is where the majority of the funds are received from, since Act 60 and Act 130 were passed over the previous years. And you can see there's a couple of fairly significant increases in those revenue lines aside from the general state support grant. The general state support grant is the number that balances the budget. So when that number is up significantly, it typically will signal the tax rate being up. But as I said, fortunately, it's not up the $800,000 that we lost in revenues. It's up to $269,000, and it's being offset. The increase is being offset by, you see an additional amount in special ed aid, $106,000, some extraordinary aid, $46,000, a couple of the large numbers, and then the other number that Woody mentioned earlier, the $115,000 it's a new entry in the revenue line. So those increases offset the general state support grant. Federal funds is the last section on the page, and you can see that is primarily the Career Center grants, and that is down a little bit from the fiscal year 15. On page 40 is the last entry for sources of funds. We're proposing a special article that utilizes $875,000 of the current fund balance to reduce taxes. And you can see that compares to fiscal year 14 of $1,150,000. Fiscal year 15 on page 40 there at the top, $750,000. So it's less than fiscal year 14, but more than fiscal year 15. As far as what that leaves available, assuming fiscal year 15 comes in as planned, the projections of fund balance are what you see on the balance of page 40, where we started this fiscal year 15 with this $3,999,000. It's broken down in the figures that you see there on page 40, which is primarily the education reserve, $2.3 million. We reserved the $300,000 for capital. The $750,000 is planned, as I mentioned, to be refunded this current fiscal year, and that leaves an unassigned reserve of that $586,000. So, looking forward, we've already committed the 308. We've committed the $750,000, and then if this budget passes, we would commit the $875,000, which would leave about $2.2 million. And we felt that was a reasonable reserve given the variations that we see in education finance, variations that go along with the funding formula primarily. So things like the CLA that adjusts our 5-member town tax rates, and student enrollment costs that sometimes are not as predictable as regular ed, such as special education, and then variations in revenue, such as the bond refund. Those are all variations that if a district has reserves, they can help smooth out the effects of spending and funding formula changes on the tax rate. So to tie that together with the tax rate projection, we go all the way to page 85 in this book, and the revenues and the expenditure plans get integrated into a funding formula calculation that's illustrated on page 85 and turned into a projected tax rate. So I can walk you through that briefly, and feel free to ask any questions. You see at the top of that page on 85 the same number that Woody has just explained in terms of expenditures, $27,888,000. That's the board-approved budget presented to be voted on Tuesday. Of all of the revenue that I outlined on page 38, 39, 40, there's a subset on line 5 that's totals up to $8,524,000. That's essentially tuition revenue, special education reimbursement, transportation aid. It's everything other than the big number I mentioned that sets the tax rate, the general education spending. The way the funding formula works is we just take the total spending, we subtract the revenue that we are not asking from the state for the tax source, and we get a net number. That net number is $19,363,000. We then divide our student count by that net spending, and we essentially get the tax rate. So in this case, it's 19,363,000 divided by the 1,127 equalized students is 17,167 per student. That compares to the 16,437 in the prior year. The state gives us one more index they announce every year. It's called the base education spending amount. It's a small print on line 13. We take our spending amount, divide it by the state index that's announced every year, and it gives us a factor. That factor is multiplied times the statewide property tax, and that is the tax rate. So $1.81 on line 14. And if you were to try to do the calculation, it is just 17,167 divided by 9,459 equals 1.8149. So at the Union High School level, that rate is proportionally assigned to each of the member towns. And then from there, the rate is combined with the elementary district budget and the same calculation. And so it's the weighted average of the UHS and the elementary tax rates that produce the equalized tax rate that theoretically we can compare across the state. And then we adjust those tax rates by the common level of appraisal so that we have the actual tax rate that's in the mailbox when we open up our property tax bills from the town office. So what we've published is what the state requires on page 85, which shows the $1.81 and then the proportion that is assigned to Brattleboro Town and Dummerston and Guilford, Putney, and Vernon. When you look at your town reports in each one of those towns, you'll see the Union High School share, you'll see the local share, and you'll see the total tax rate, both equalized and adjusted. So that's a summary.
And as a result of somewhat declining enrollment in the last 2 or 3 years, that's had an impact on what our tax rate is. The good news is that, and I referred to the BAM's enrollment, but the other good news is that the high school seems to about have leveled off, and the Career Center is anticipated to be about the same. So our student census will, we believe, not drop next year. As a matter of fact, it may be up a little bit in total. So that trend will, within a year or two, will catch up and help us. But in the meantime, in spite of controlling expenses to flat, we do have a tax increase.
Yep. I also have it's a single sheet that the state asked us to publish. If it's related to this, is this an all right time?
Sure.
To pass it around and we can talk about it.
Anything from the state, we're just looking forward to reading.
Yeah. Copies.
And these is this something that'll be available, I assume, at the meeting?
Yes, it'll be a handout. This is a single sheet with 2 documents. And once it gets around, I'll go over it quickly. So this document has titled Comparative Data for Cost Effectiveness. That's a format that the Agency of Education develops. There was a statute passed a few years ago that directs school districts to publish this data in annual reports. We'll make this part of the handouts at the February meeting, Tuesday meeting. It is also relevant to the page 85 tax act calculation that I just went over. It's part of the inputs into the system that calculates tax rates. So this is the state's format. Some people find it a little difficult just because when you look at it, you see you've got a fiscal year 14 group of data. Then in the middle of the page, it's fiscal year 13, and in fiscal year 15 at the bottom. So you got 3 different years. And I think the rationale is some of the data is known this time of year, and others is not, so they pick and choose. But it is the same format consistently. So if you looked at last year's document, you would see the same format. So the first level of data indicates just the 9 through 12 enrollment. And it compares BUHS 9-12 to other similar schools in Vermont. And then it provides us with some student-teacher ratios. And the student-teacher ratio, keep in mind the teacher is all certified positions from the Agency of Education. So that includes nurses, librarians, counselors. It's not just the classroom teacher.
Is it full-time equivalent?
And it is a full-time equivalent, yeah.
Okay.
There also is a data there for the administrator-teacher ratio and a student administrative ratio. So you can see there's similarities with some of the cohorts and differences. One concern I have about this kind of data is that it doesn't show the proportion of students who are eligible for an IEP, the special education services, and we know that that's a significant variation from district to district. Also, when we need to provide support services for students at risk of failing school, often that's associated with communities with high levels of poverty. That again is not provided here, so it's I think a limited usefulness in terms of drawing conclusions. And that's the same issue with the midsection, fiscal year 13 data, where it's basically just showing the current expense per student relative to other systems. So we're similar to Middlebury Union in terms of the cost per student under this definition. Current expense excludes some expenses such as special education. And then the lower set, it gets back to the tax rate data that we were talking about, and that is fiscal year 15, which is the current year. And again, you see that we're similar to Middlebury, and again, it has size, but looks like 3 districts are 7-12 data and 3 are 9-12 data.
Why is the 14 school level data, why is it all 9-12, and then in the next one, in 13, they jump to 7-12, and then in 15, we also are on 7-12, so.
Yeah, it's a good question, Sean. We're not given input into this data set, and there's always been suggestions from the administration to the Agency of Education to provide an explanation for that. I don't know the answer.
Because it's a little bit different generally, cost to educate 7 through 12 versus 9 through 12 through the program.
Yep, grade level structure is, it does make quite a difference in cost. The flip side of this document is it's similar data that I put into a series of graphs primarily to illustrate what Woody was referring to as we were wrapping up our overview. When we deal with the funding formula as it is today, it's a cost per student formula, and in general, if spending doesn't match enrollment in terms of being either up or down, then because it's a cost per student formula, if those trends diverge, the tax rate is directly affected, either up or down. So in the favorable sense, if you have increasing enrollment faster than your spending, then your tax rate generally is going to decline because your cost per student goes down. In the inverse, if your enrollment is declining at a greater pace than your spending, then your cost per student is going to go up and your tax rate's going to go up. So most schools in Vermont are really struggling with the declining enrollment and spending not mirroring the rate of decline, and therefore tax rates have been going up quite a bit. So you can see at a glance, our enrollment is relatively flat, but it is somewhat down. It's not like precipitous decline, but it's relatively flat with a slight decline. The student-teacher ratio is the major cost of providing education. So when we get into cost per student, that ratio is something that's of a lot of interest at the state level. We are right around, as you see, the 11 students per teacher per complete, total certified professional. Our budget has been relatively flat over the last 5 years, but it is slightly up. $27,391,000 in fiscal year 12, and fiscal year 16 we're proposing $27,888,000. So it's up a little bit, but because those same statistics are different, enrollment being 1,139 in 2012 and then 1,094, is down versus spending slightly up. That's the primary reason why the last graph is showing a greater upward trend than our spending. The other base to the tax rate is what the state announces each year. When I did the calculation with you, you remember we take what we spend, we divide it by a base ed spending amount, and then we multiply it times the statewide property tax. And this year it's a very simple calculation because the statewide property tax is $1, so whatever that number is times 1 is the same number. But in the prior years you can see that we've gone from 2012, 87 cents is what we were basing our calculations on, and that's gone all the way up to $1. So that's in itself is a 14-15% increase. And then our calculation comes in on top of that as a result of changes in enrollment. Any questions I can try to answer?
So the bottom line on that state tax rate is the state number?
That's the $1 or the 98 cents in the current year, fiscal year 15. Yeah, 98 cents is the announced rate. Generally, it's a recommendation by the governor and the tax commissioner in December. School boards use that to estimate, as we are doing right now. But the legislature approves that once they adjourn, and oftentimes they don't approve that until May.
And the top line is what? Total BUHS?
Yeah, that's the equalized total tax rate, which reflects the spending, the revenue, the enrollment, the base education index, and the statewide property tax. All of those variables go into the calculation.
And so how does that compare to the page 85.
Yeah, page 85, it's the same number so the $1.81 is the same number as line 14. And the $1.73 is that same number on line 14 for fiscal year 15. And the $1.63 and the $1.57, those are the same numbers.
Okay.
But also, just to give you the context, you see on that same line, there's a very small print underneath the $1.8149. It says based on $1, and then there's the small print again in fiscal year 15. It says based on 98 cents. That's what I'm illustrating there. Those are state numbers that are announced in November and then either confirmed or changed in the legislative session. Remember last year they estimated that rate, it ended up at 98 cents, but at this time we were talking about numbers like $1.03. At one point there was discussion of $1.07. So if you look at last year's annual report, it's probably $1.03 or $1.04. But after town meeting, after our annual vote, the legislature changed the recommended number. So this is all an estimate.
And so the tax rate is up 8 cents, but the increase to taxpayers is not as high because of the surplus?
That is net of the surplus. So without the surplus, the tax rate would have been higher.
Right.
Yeah. So using the surplus, we brought it down to an 8-cent increase. If we didn't use the surplus, it would have been higher.
But then why is the homestead, the union tax rates only like 2 cents? So is the taxpayers going to see a 2-cent increase, or are they going to see the 8-cent increase?
That's a good question, and the answer is depends on which town you're in. So I do have a summary document. I don't have copies, but I can get you a copy. So what I was saying is we take the $1.81 from BUHS, and then let's use the example in Dummerston. So in Dummerston, they would get the 56 cents, you see that on page 85, they would get 56 cents of the BUHS rate.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would get a proportionate share of their local budget. And then we take the weighted average of the two. So they have 31% of their kids at BUHS, which means they have 59% of their kids at their local school. And when we combine those two weighted averages, their total tax rate is going to be $1.75, and that is actually less than the prior year. So to put that in the context of your question, Dummerston will not see an 8-cent increase. They will see a 2-penny decline. And the reason is because their local budget drops the 8 cents down to 5 cents, and then their CLA adjusts that down because their CLA increased from 98% of market value to 103. So that's a very favorable development for Dummerston. And then just quickly, Guilford net effect up 4.9 cents is the estimate in the tax rate. Putney is estimated to increase 7.9 cents. Vernon is estimated to increase 9.1 cents. And Brattleboro Town is estimated to increase 4.4 cents.
And what is the Dummerston number?
And the Dummerston is estimated to decline 2.5 cents, which is $1.75.
And those are total, or those are just the high school?
That's
impact?
K-12, pre-K-12, that's everything.
Well, what is the impact of this high school budget? I know that that's not the total, but the impact of this high school budget on the tax rate.
Yep, that's on that page 85, and that's that 56 cents. You see on page 85, this is Dummerston.
Right.
Yep, that's their share of the $1.75.
Right, that's what, okay.
Yep, and if you wanted to know what's the impact, you look at the prior year, 51 or 52 cents, and see the high school's impact there would be the difference of those two numbers, which is about 5 cents. But
Right.
then when the CLA comes in, it reduces the tax rate below the prior year.
Right, and just to make sure, so I understand, so originally, the line 14, it says there's an 8 cents difference.
Right,
So if there was no surplus, the taxes from this budget would be going up another 2 or 3 or 4 cents.
that's right.
But with the surplus, that's why the increases are just 2 cents, 5 cents, 1 cent down there.
That's right.
Right, okay, thank you.
More questions?
Questions or comments? The revenue and funding part is
I've
complicated.
got a quick one. On page 85, line 10, Frank, there's a small figure that says threshold.
Oh, yeah.
Is there a penalty for exceeding that, or what does that mean?
Yes, there is a penalty for exceeding that. It does appear that Brattleboro Union exceeds that, but there are exclusions that are deductions from our spending amount, and so we do not trigger the penalty because, for example, you see that 1,348 per student associated with the debt, the bond debt that BUHS is obligated to pay. The state has said, we don't want to penalize a district for keeping up with their facility costs, so they exempt that. But if we spent the 17,167 and we did not have an exemption, then the penalty is calculated on the announced figure, which is the 17,103. They compare it to what the board is proposing per student, and in this case, 17,167. The difference is $64 in that example. That $64 is tacked back onto the 17,167 figure. So it's a cumulative number that pushes your numerator up in the calculation. So instead of 17,167, it would be 17,260, and then you divide that by the 9,459. Your factor goes up, your tax rate goes up. That's how they get you.
But we don't have to worry about that
We-
now, because we have
will
it.
not worry about that. And none of our schools are triggering the threshold in this proposed cycle.
Other questions or comments? Okay. Guess we will move on and we'll assign those before we.
It looks like they've been assigned.
Well, I kind of,
Previous discussion.
it must have been, yeah, well, because that was during the snow
Yeah.
situation, so I just went,
So we should just.
well, we can switch it around.
No, I think we should just let
Yeah.
people know.
Yeah, this is the assignment for the motions at the meeting on February 10th. And due to snow days and things happening, we weren't able to collaborate like we normally do, and I kind of put some names, and I don't remember where everybody was last year. I know certain people have certain preferences, but I'll read down through, and if there's a major issue, please let us know.
If you look on 12 of this report, you'll see the motions, and you can write your name down.
Oh, yeah, that's
Big book. Big book, page 12.
I'll read anything.
We'll have cards for next Tuesday.
Yeah, there'll be they'll have a big card in big print right in front of everybody. Article 1, we have Ruth, that's the district officers. And then Ron will be at the podium until Article 2 arrives, because that's where we elect the moderator. And so Ron will be officiating that, and Mike will nominate the moderator.
Sure.
With Vernon
Yeah,
connection there. Article 3 is nomination of clerk, and that would be Melanie. Article 4, see if we're going to re-elect Frank, and that would be Lori. Article 5 is auditor, and that would be Ian. Article 6 is the amount to pay directors, and that would be Russ. Article 7 is the using a portion of the reserve, and that will be myself. And Article 8 is the big money number, the actual expenditures of 27-something million, and that I have my name on. If there's somebody that's really anxious about going to do that, or we can talk about it, but I haven't generally,
Yeah, let's not give that up.
let's not give
You
that.
do that. Okay, there's not gonna be any takers. so.
Article 9 is the categorical grants and age. Ruth, you said you were the only one who knew how to say that word, and I just screwed it up.
I didn't
so-
say I was the only one. I said frequently people do
Right.
have trouble with that
Yes,
word.
and I just did. Categorical grants is Ruth, and then Sean ends up with Article 10, to borrow money pending receipt of taxes from the towns.
And then I'll take 11.
Of the other business, yes, you'll be the one that, it's your favorite motion.
You think you have other business? I'm asking. We might, so I'll let you know.
Okay. You let me know if there's any other business.
I will.
Not that this matters at all, but I think I was actually the one to second the motion to, for the articles, and I'm not listed on the bottom. It doesn't really matter, but I was just wondering. I've been having some trouble with attendance, so I was like, hey, I know I was there for that one.
Maybe you didn't sign it.
Maybe I didn't sign it.
Well, we could pencil that in.
We don't
just
need to
make
pencil
sure
it in.
everybody acknowledges that.
I just realized.
There's other business right there.
Ruth got that. Just-
We probably just a number of lines, because there's only 6 signed, and there's a lot more.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's
I'd have to look at the actual warrants. It's okay if I take
Is
this.
that a
Yep,
quorum?
you can have that.
That's a quorum, definitely.
Okay, so we've got that figured out. When we move on to the clerk's report, and we would look for approval of the minutes of January 26th, which have been distributed.
I move approval of the minutes of January 26th.
Second.
Okay, is there any additions, deletions, or corrections? If not, all in favor of approving the minutes of January 26th as written, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstentions?
I abstained as well.
Okay, we had, did you get?
Melanie Russ.
Okay,
We sound like this on purpose.
all right. Communications, anybody have any communications? No? Okay, that's it for the clerk's report. Recognition of groups and visitors, we have none. We move on quickly to consent agenda. Is there a motion to go into consent agenda?
So moved.
Lori, second.
Second.
Ricky? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions? Okay, we are in consent agenda, and we will report on the Finance Committee meeting.
The Finance Committee last met on Friday, the 30th of January, and we approved warrant numbers 11, 11, 12, 11, 14, 11, 15, 11, 18, 11, 19, 11, 20, and 11, 21 in the amount of $982,87. And we also approved the warrants of January 19th, warrant numbers 1123, 1124, 1125, 1127, 1128, 1129, 1130, and 1131 in the amount of $209,716.72. We also approved payrolls of December 12th in the amount of $428,797.75. And December 24th in the amount of $471,864.23. We also approved payrolls from January, but they did not get in the agenda. So I guess we can't do those this time, right?
That will be on the next.
Okay. So that was what we did. Aside from that, do you have anything else, Robert?
A couple of items that we spent just a little time on, and one is developing, initial discussion of developing some guidelines for fund balance use. And we have a model that the town of Brattleboro uses, and as a working start for that, and we will be having discussions over the next few months of a guideline, not a policy, but a guideline for fund balance use. We also were informed that we have closed on the Wilson's Woods property as of January 27th, so that's behind us. And I believe that was about it, unless I missed something, Frank.
Nope, that's it.
Okay. All right. We really didn't schedule any other committee reports since we just had board meetings recently. We did want to get those warrants taken care of. Is there a motion to approve consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Lori and Russ. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstained? None. Consent agenda is approved. Is there any unfinished business? If not, new business, annual meeting preparation, that would be a signing of anything else related to the annual meeting?
I think you've done that.
Yep, we're all set. Okay,
7 o'clock next Tuesday?
Same place?
tell your friends, neighbors, come on out for a rousing good time.
Just in the gym.
In the gym.
Yep.
We're not giving away toasters.
Have you done it in the past?
No, but sometimes businesses do that too.
I gotcha.
Okay, is there any other kind of a motion?
It must be.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all very much.